And we're back with looking at all the best anime from each respective year in history. Last time we covered from 1970 to 1972, which had a few remakes here and there, or I guess those weren't remakes. They had a few classics that ended up getting remakes. And in this video, we're going to keep pushing it with highlighting the year of 1973. And there's some cool stuff here, I gotta say. If you haven't seen the first video in this series, I gave the whole spill, but I'll just do like a super quick version here. We're going to talk about every year in anime pretty much. I'm going to highlight the best from those years. There are a few caveats to avoid talking about just dozens and dozens and dozens of anime. But like I said, I went into more detail in the first video, so go watch that if you're interested in like my picking criteria for the best. Other than that though, let's just hop right into it with Babel Nasai. Or is it Babel Nasai? I'm gonna go Babel. That sounds better. So with the majority of the series I covered in 1970 to 1972, they felt more like series I was watching specifically to make content on, not because I actually enjoyed them. And that has a lot of factors into it, mostly in the sense that a handful of them were anime that got remade later down the line, and I had seen the remakes already, so I knew what to expect out of them. But also because they just weren't the greatest in the grand scheme, right? Obviously within that specific year they're fine, but in the grand scheme of like content and storytelling, they were kind of But Babel Nasai was fun. It wasn't amazing or anything like that, and I'd be lying to you if I said I would voluntarily watch this without making this video. But that being said, it was still fun for what it was. This won't take too long to go over, mostly because the premise is pretty simple and rather straightforward. Essentially, the story goes as follows. We follow our young main character, Koichi, who one day learns that he's the reincarnation of an alien protector, and he is now the defender of Earth due to the fact that he is this reincarnation. Koichi goes up against the likes of an evil cult who are trying to take over the world and do all the stuff that evil cults do in their spare time. Not that much death for villains at this point in anime history, but we'll get there, don't worry. And to help him take down this evil cult hell-bent on taking over the world are a trio of quote-unquote aliens. Now I put that in quotes because it more so looks like a giant mech, a pterodactyl, and a panther. But you know, hey, whatever, they're aliens. That's what the show calls them. So we will stick with that labeling of calling them aliens. And yeah, man, that's pretty much it. I will say the thing I enjoyed most about this series is the fact that over its 39 episodes, it's essentially just one giant training arc, with the last 4 or 5 episodes being where you can really see Koichi come into his own. You're like, oh man, all the training he did and all the traveling across Asia and the Swiss Alps mountains, and it's so cool seeing the guy he's become. He went from like this small little preteen kid with all this power, and now he's a super powerful hero and he's saving the day and blah blah blah. Keeping with the running theme of what I was saying in the original video, in that a lot of these ideas don't really seem that cool or interesting on paper, but you have to remember that we are in the current day that is decades and decades removed from when this stuff actually came out. So a lot of the tropes, I guess would be the best way to phrase it, were nowhere near as common then as they are now. That all being said though, at its core, it's just a power fantasy that's geared towards teen and preteen boys about saving the day and having cool sidekicks in the form of aliens by your side with a nice fun group of friends. And yeah, that's Babel Nasai. For my own little research, it looks like there are a few variations of this series. I'm not sure if I'll cover them. I'll definitely check them out. I just don't know if I'm going to bring them up because I have to see, one, if they're just continuations of the series, or two, if they're entire remakes or reimaginings. I'm not 100% sure. I just know there are other versions, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. All right, moving on to one I'm really excited to talk about because it's kind of wild in the grand scheme of anime. We're going to talk about Mazinger Z versus Devilman. Now, context, especially if you didn't watch the first video, really go watch that video, please. So Mazinger Z and Devilman are two anime I individually talked about in the first video of this series. Now, I talked about them from the perspective of not having even knowing that this existed. I didn't actually stumble across this until after publishing that first video. In that video, I pointed out how I felt like these series were kind of representative of something trying to be bigger than just a broadcast animation, in the sense that when they were greenlit by these studios, they had a very specific demographic in mind, and they had a very specific idea in mind in terms of how they wanted to market, timeline, and just make these super profitable series in terms of merchandising and collaborations, and just something bigger than you turning on your TV every Tuesday afternoon, catching an episode of Devilman and not thinking about it again until next Tuesday. And I went into more detail about how that could have caused somewhat of harm, specifically when we were talking about Devilman, because I feel like it was doing a bit of a disservice to the series to be gearing it towards preteens and teens and treating Devilman as if he was some sort of like action figure style hero, or someone that could be milked like a cash cow in the sense of like a Dragon Ball character or something, because that wasn't the perspective that these characters were written from, and that's very easy to tell if you take a quick glance at the manga and then easily bounce back to the original iteration of it in anime form, and you're like, these are kind of different, And Mazinger Z more so represents going towards the right direction and seeing how you can't just grab anything vaguely violent and throw it towards kids. You have to put in a little bit more work, even if your demographic is young. So why do I bring all that up? Well, I think the existence of this OVA supports my running theory so much more now. So as the title implies, this is an OVA that sees the main character of Devilman himself, and then the main character of Mazinger Z going head up against each other, quote unquote, in a sort of crossover event. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't exist in the 1970s, much less did I exist in Japan in the 1970s, so I don't really have the greatest scope of how beloved or not beloved Devilman and Mazinger were, and so I can't speak to as if this crossover should exist or not. But even not knowing that information, I'll be honest, I kinda hate versus crossovers, movie thingies. They kinda suck and they're really annoying, and they usually kinda BS you, to be honest, with really cheesy and goofy marketing. Like, see this one character you really love go against this other character you really love. Who's gonna come out on top? And 99.9% of the time, including here in Devilman versus Mazinger Z, they go, oh wait, I have no real issue with you. Let's team up and take down that guy. He's the real villain of this movie. And it's like, oh, okay, so you guys are just gonna pretend you didn't market this as like a death battle type of thing for the past 9 months. You're just gonna pretend that like, oh, okay, okay, cool. And that happens all the time. I'm pretty sure that's one of the main reasons you don't even really see the versus movies as much as you probably used to. I think the last big versus crossover event that comes to mind is probably Kong versus Godzilla. and that ended, spoilers, the same exact way as I'm describing here. They fought for a little bit, but in the end, they kind of just end up teaming up and realize that they don't actually have any beef with each other. Shocking, I know, right? It's almost as if when there are two properties that are actually really, really popular in culture and very, very profitable, they aren't going to allow one of those properties to take the short end of the stick in the movie. I know. Crazy. And that same thing happens here. Devilman and Mazinger Z face off in the beginning when they first come into contact with each other, and then they realize, oh wait, we don't actually have a problem with each other. Let's deal with this third party guy who's too tough for me individually and too tough for you individually, but together we can make it happen. And it feels really, really goofy. And at this point in me talking about it, you're probably like, why are you even bringing it up then? Because this is supposed to be the best anime of 1973 and you're just ragging on it. Alright, I'll explain. Despite the fact that Devilman was a great deviation from its source material and that it was completely morphed into this weird thing that was supposed to be marketable and a cash cow, essentially, I kind of think Devilman versus Mazinger Z kind of works a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. Now, is it something that you need to go out of your way to watch? Absolutely not, no. But it's kind of cool to think about. As far as I can see, this is the first major crossover event to happen in anime, and to be fair, there really aren't that many events in terms of crossovers to happen in the anime or manga industry, at least not really, really big ones with really, really popular IPs. The last real big one that comes to mind is probably that like Dragon Ball One Piece thing where they went to like a contest or something. And there's also another anime involved that's slipping my mind right now, but that was over a decade ago at this point. So I can appreciate seeing these two properties interact with each other. The biggest issue that comes with this OVA is simply the fact that there's a nagging voice in the back of my head saying they're making what was literally supposed to be symbolism for nuclear war and devastation as like some anime mascot, and that's not what Devilman is supposed to be. But if you can tune out of that and look at this from the perspective of a 10 to 16 year old who really enjoys Mazinger Z and really enjoys Devilman and gets to see them interact with each other, it's cool, man. I won't lie to you. Looking at it from that specific perspective, it works. It's fine. If you just don't really think about it too much, it works. And it's cool to see two really big things interact inevitably. Despite that huge rant I just went on about why versus content in terms of movies and TV shows and comic books is usually always kind of garbanzo because it ends the same way, there's a reason that they constantly make a bunch of money. Despite the fact that it's not being that popular of a practice these days, Godzilla vs. Kong made a lot of money. Why? Because there are a lot of Kong fans and there are a lot of Godzilla fans. Batman versus the Ninja Turtles made a butt ton of money. Why? Because there are a lot of Ninja Turtle fans and there are a lot of Batman fans. And I'm sure in both those scenarios, a handful of the fan bases interested in those films knew that those guys weren't going to fight to the death. Batman wasn't going to kill all the Ninja Turtles, and the Ninja Turtles weren't going to kill Batman and invade Goth. We knew that that wasn't going to be the case. And there's a correct way to handle a versus movie, and there's an incorrect way to handle a versus movie. Even going in knowing that it's just a title, it's just marketing, they're not bitter rivals, you can still make it work and you can still not make it work. When it comes to Devilman and it comes to Mazinger Z, they definitely highlight the more impactful moments and ideas from both of those series, and they bring them together. They highlight the things that I think were cool and interesting as ideas and premises on an individual level, and when the crossover happens, they kind of push those more to the forefront and say, hey, it's that thing you love about Mazinger Z, but it's also mixing with that thing you love about Devilman. And it works for what it is. Now, once again, if you know anything about the Devilman source material, it's really, really weird again to see him just presented as like this mascot guy, and he's supposed to be like a figurine, and all of these people are supposed to beloved, and it's just not. That's just not what Devilman is. That's not the perspective it was written in. So it gets goofy and corny if the more you think about it and the more you know about Devilman as a manga. But again, ignoring all that, it's fine. It's just fine. On its own, it's just alright, but I think because it's one of the first moments that you can really track down and pinpoint and say, hey, that's one of the earliest big crossover events in anime, I had to throw it up here. It's worth talking about. I think it's an interesting bit of history. If you're wondering about the details, by the way, the demon clan from Devilman invades and is attacking Mazinger Z's world, and Mazinger Z sees Devilman naturally, and it's like, you're one of those demons, and he's like, no, I'm a good guy, let's team up and take the demon clan down. And it's about 40 minutes in runtime. It was probably just some special event. I'm pretty sure Toei gets the credit for this animation as a studio, so like I said, it's whatever, man. It's just a nice little link up for anyone in this demographic to enjoy during that 1973 summer. So, moving on. Next up, I have Ace Onare, or Aim for the Ace in English, because God knows if I'm saying that right. This is our first sports anime. Hey. So, this is an anime that follows a 15-year-old high school girl on her rise to become the best tennis player on the planet. This is one of those anime that makes me really, really, really despise the whole like demographic thing in terms of just entertainment, period, not just anime. Because don't get me wrong, I understand looking for your market, I understand locking down your market, I understand trying to put your piece of entertainment in the best position to succeed as possible. I get all that, right? But in the end, good content is good content, and this is some good content. So this anime pretty much sounds exactly what you think it would be in terms of you're just watching a girl play tennis, man, and you're watching her have to deal with the politics of high school. You know, it's funny, something that watching this series made me realize, because there are a lot of moments where it's treated very, very, very seriously, but she's just dealing with like prototypical high school girl stuff, and it made me come to the realization that high schoolers are boring. And it made me bring up the question even more of, why are there so many modern dramas that choose high school as their setting? Because not only does it feel super unrealistic when you have them dealing with all these things that 99% of high schoolers never, ever, ever even thought about, much less had to deal with, but it makes it even sillier because when it is just being a normal high school, the show is really, really boring. And now don't get me wrong, like it's cool that shows like Euphoria and whatever exists. I'm just saying it's really like funny to think about when you take a step back, because looking at this, I kept waiting on something crazy to happen, right? I don't know what specifically, but something really like out of the norm for a high schooler to deal with. It's weird because I expected that, but throughout the entire run of watching this, I want to say it was about 26-ish episodes, nothing insane happens. It's really just her playing tennis and dealing with high school dramatics, you know, boyfriend stuff, romance, getting schoolwork done. That's it, and that's fine because it still manages to be a rather strong in its foundation as a series, despite not being super unique or over the top. But despite the fact that most 15-year-old high school girls could probably relate to this more, I'd be really interested to see what the age demographic of this series actually was, because something tells me that high schoolers wouldn't actually watch this show, and it would be more geared towards like elementary and middle schoolers, which is just crazy to think about in the grand scheme of things. But then again, I guess it's not that insane, because if you go back and you watch like any of your childhood shows especially if you were watching shows in like that Disney Nick cartoon type thing. Like if you were around my age and you were watching those 3 channels predominantly growing up, it's funny how those series that would depict high school, when you actually grow up, they're a lot more akin to middle school than high school. So it's just funny in that sense. And that's probably because no high school kid is watching those shows anyway, right? You're well too old for those at that point. But regardless, Aim for the Ace, just a good show, just a good sports show. The most excitement you're gonna get is wondering if or how she's gonna be able to win this match, but still fun, still cool. And I say this as someone who doesn't particularly care for sports anime. I think being a fan of actual sports hinders my ability to like sports anime a lot, but not that big a fan of tennis, so maybe that's why I enjoyed it. Moving on. Last for 1973, but most certainly not least, is Neo Human Casshon. Casshon? Casshon. How would you pronounce Casshon? Casshon, right? Casshon. Casshon? I'm over this shit. So I'll be honest, not too much to go over here. For the most part, this series is just your nice standard cookie cutter Saturday morning cartoon, and that's by no means a bad thing. I'm not saying cookie cutter with a negative tone, but that's pretty much all it is. Even with that though, it's solid enough. I think it serves its purpose, which is kind of just riding the same wave of Mazinger Z and Devilman, of trying to figure out something that you can pitch to kids that's still going to be rather marketable and milkable. Wait, that didn't come out right. Wait. And from my understanding, this series ended up being moderately successful. It's definitely not something we still talk about today as a property, but it had its time in the limelight. Again, from just my understanding, got a few new iterations down the line. Maybe we'll talk about those, maybe we won't. It kind of has this weird dark-ish tone in terms of just the story. It's pretty much your standard sci-fi plot. Humans create robots. Robots start to dislike humans. Robots now want to enslave humans. So the show is kind of like showing you a war between humans and robots, but it's not dark at all. Because of the varied tone and the colors and the dialogue and the music, it still has that super like cartoony feel to it, and you really have to like work hard to try to make it seem any darker than what it really is. It's kind of just dark in premise, right? But in actual practice, it is not too crazy. It's like Santa Claus, you know, when you just speak casually on the idea of Santa Claus, you know, being like a fat man who for some reason only has the drive and desire to break into people's homes and give little kids gifts. It's weird, right? That's weird. But, you know, in practice, it's like a sweet thing. Santa Claus, I want to take pictures with Santa and stuff like that. It's one of those situations, right? So when you're actually watching it, it's not that dark. Just the overhead tone and writing, if you were to look at it on paper and you're like, this is a kid's show, this sounds kind of dark, man. But, you know, when you actually see it in form and it's all pieced together, like, okay, I get it. And with that, those are the best anime from 1973. And that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed, go ahead and subscribe, man. I make videos of this quality or better all the time. So if you subscribe and turn on notifications and do all that other YouTube stuff, you have a better chance of seeing them. Yeah, I don't know the next video off the top of my head yet. It's kind of a wild time for anime and manga right now. I got My Hero that started back up. You got Bleach getting its final arc finally animated, which, high take, they're doing a terrible job marketing that, but whatever. Tokyo Revengers, that manga just wrapped up, and no spoilers, but some people not happy about it. So there's a lot going on right now. I gotta pick and decide which one of those things may deserve videos on top of everything else I already have planned. But regardless, I am leaving.